the problem is how much dollars can we make available in the United States for the rest of the world. And then when it goes out of the United States to the rest of the world and keeps circulating internationally, how much of it comes back to America, and so on and so forth. And this all started around 1971 when the dollar-gold parity was stopped, what we used to call the U.S. dollar-gold window stopped. As you know, since the beginning of the 20th century, the United Kingdom, which was, of course, the superpower at that time, along with a lesser superpower, which was France, and the rest of the world, were trying to come up with a monetary system which actually can get the world to deal with each other trade-wise. So they came up with the fixed monetary system that satisfied the world to some extent, and then in 1948, after World War II, the world started something called the International Monetary Fund. First, they started the World Bank, and then under the World Bank, they started something called the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund was a fund that was contributed to by members of the World Bank. The United States, of course, is the biggest contributor, and then the United Kingdom, France, European countries, and so on. The Soviet Union was not a member of the IMF at that time because they had their own bloc, the Warsaw Pact, and so on and so forth. The 1948 agreement stipulated that from now on we are going to have the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. And in a very well-known meeting, and you can Google it if you want to do your own research, called the Bretton Woods Agreement, B-R-E-T-T-O-N, Woods Agreement. Bretton Woods is in New Hampshire, up north, close to Massachusetts. They had an historic meeting in which they agreed that the U.S. dollar will be the reserve currency of the world, that the U.S. dollar is going to be like gold. And by this, they meant that anytime you bring me an ounce of gold, the U.S. dollar will be given in $35. So that was the price of gold, and that was the fixed reference point, which was the U.S. dollar relationship. Now, of course, because of the market forces of supply and demand, local currencies in Europe, like at the time, the French had the French franc, the British had the British pound, the Scandinavian countries had their own currencies, Germany had the Deutsche Mark, and so on. So they said, we are going to allow the exchange rate of these currencies against the dollar to fluctuate up and down within a plus or minus 3%, and they used to call this the snake, because it looked like a snake. It goes up and down and up and down, and so on and so forth. Now, in 1952, when President Eisenhower came to power, and Marshall had his well-known Marshall Plan for Europe and Marshall Plan for Japan, they, of course, invested a lot of U.S. dollars in Japan and a lot of U.S. dollars in Europe, in particular Germany, which actually all of its industries were completely leveled. I mean, the automobile industries in Hanover and in Stuttgart and Düsseldorf were completely leveled. Berlin was completely leveled, and the French were not touched much. But then they had to rebuild Europe, and because Germany has the propensity of building itself, because they had all the scientists, all the know-how, they rebuilt again. And within a few years, the economy started to grow and to prosper, and that returned a lot of dollars. So a lot of dollars were floating in Europe, and a new category of dollars was created called the euro dollars. Now, What is the euro dollars? These are dollars which are available in the European market in the different banks, and these banks wanted to invest them. So they would lend in euro dollars and euro dollar rates and so on and so forth. In 1966, 67, 68, a new president for France came. His name was Charles de Gaulle. Charles de Gaulle was one of the colonels of the resistance movement of France to the invasion of the French, the German forces into France, and he worked with Churchill and the Allies to liberate France. So he became the president of France, and of course he was a nationalist, and he and his monetary planners decided that they had a lot of US dollars. They wanted to support the position of the French franc on the exchange rates in the markets, and then they said, okay, we have an agreement. We can send US dollars from France to America, and we can get gold in return. And indeed, they sent dollars to the United States government, and the United States Department of Treasury ordered Fort Knox to send France the equivalent in gold. At that time, of course, there were a lot of rumblings going on in many fronts. The first rumbling is in the production of oil and the price of oil. If you compare the price of oil, that is a source of energy, to the price of coal, which is another source of energy, you would find that per BTUs, or British thermal units, which is the content of energy of oil was very cheaply priced. So they had to find a way to redo this, and the supply of oil was actually increasing. Why? Because the projection was that there would be a lot of independent movements in the oil-producing countries, and it was better for the oil-producing companies to produce oil as much as possible because the discount rate was really not very high. So they wanted to produce as much oil. So the production of oil actually crossed over the demand of oil in 1971, 72, and the real cross was 1973. And you all know when supply and demand cross, what happens? Then there is a shortage, and when there is a shortage, then what happens? Prices start skyrocketing. Anyway, the French sent to get gold from Fort Knox, and they started getting it on a regular basis. But then the planners in the Department of Treasury started getting concerned because almost 20% to 25% of the gold reserves in Fort Knox were depleting. And then in 1971, President Nixon issued his very famous decree in August, which included the closing of what we call the gold window. Now, closing the gold window said we're going to exchange dollar for gold based on the market forces of supply and demand. He froze salaries, and he did a lot of things that actually were, you can read about them in history. From that time on, from August 1971 on until today, unfortunately, nothing happened. And no repair of the system was in place, and unfortunately, the world has been running on an ad hoc case. Now, luckily, the very smart, sophisticated planners in the Department of Treasury, in the Federal Reserve System of the United States, have been using their models and the forms to make sure that the system is balanced. Now we come to the next step. Now, of course, obviously, because of the fact that the gold window is closed, and then everybody left the exchange rates floating right and left and so on and so forth, came the European Union, and they started their own currency, which is the euro. And as a matter of fact, this was some sort of a blessing in disguise for the U.S. dollar, because this helped the monetary planners in Washington, D.C. to release the pressure on them. The theory said that if the euro can absorb 25 or 30% of the demand, then we'll be worried about 75% of the demand. And when the euro came in power, it was actually 0.8 euro to the dollar. And slowly, the dollar-euro exchange rate went as high as $1.4 to the euro, and I think the equilibrium rate is about 1.25. It's now hovering around 1.35, 1.36, something in that neighborhood. So the euro came, so now you have a block called the euro, and you have a block called the U.S. dollar, and that represents a big chunk of the world economy until China came along, and that is now in the process of negotiations. Now, the question is, what do people think? There are people who think that this is not fair because the United States can print as many dollars as they want, and they flood the market with it. And my professor in international monetary theory used to tell me that if it is chicken, the chicken got to come home to roost, and that's the dollar. The dollar, we produce the dollar, we send it all over the world, and then it will have to come home to the United States to be recognized, because it's all money that is printed by a government, and its value is defined by decree. And that's what is called in the business fiat money, F-I-A-T. So what is fiat money? Fiat money is money that's defined by decree. So the question is, how can we, as small little consumers, detect, not predict, but detect that there is a market bubble? How can we live in a society which is controlled by the big guys, and we are very small, inconsequential guys? How can we plan our life accordingly? And that is what the commodity indexation theory comes handy. I just want to familiarize you with some of the revelations in the original Torah texts, because we didn't read them, and I want to read them to you. In Exodus chapter 22, verses 24 to 26, 24 says, "When you lend money to any of my people, the Amis, to the poor among you, you shall not be to him as a creditor, nor shall you impose upon him any interest." These are the needy people. Number 25 says, "If you take your neighbor's night garment as a pledge, collateral, you shall return it to him by nightfall, so he can be covered. For that is his only covering, it is his garment for his skin. In what shall he sleep? And it shall come to pass that if he cries, 'Hour unto me,' I will hear it, for I am compassionate." Okay, that's God in the Torah. Beyond Moses, we get in the New Testament, in the Proverbs, Proverb 28:8, promises that someone who makes a profit by lending at interest gathers it from another who is kind to the poor. That is, they will not see the profit themselves. It is a personal experience of something that the prophet Habakkuk envisages for the leading world power of its day at that time. In Psalm 15, it asks the question, "Lord, who may abide in your tent?" That is, stay in your presence. It answers, includes the general requirements of a life of integrity and truthfulness, and also some concrete expectations, such as avoiding slander, keeping oath, and refusing bribes, and not lending money at interest. Prophet Ezekiel speaks in, it's pronounced Ezekiel, speaks in similar terms, enlisting obligations that people should fulfill if they wish God to treat them as righteous, such as not worshipping by means of images, defiling their neighbors, wives, robbing people, or lending at interest. This is in Ezekiel 18:8, 13, and 17. In the New Testament, we find that it refers to the lending on interest only in the context of a parable about the people entrusting his assets to his servants, Matthew 25:27, and in Luke 19:23. Jesus, God's peace and praise be upon him, does urge his followers to lend to whoever asks for a loan in Matthew 5:42, and makes explicit that this applies even to enemies and applies even if you don't expect to gain in any way from the act, Luke 6:34-35. And Maccabeus, which is a Jewish work from about the same period, which some Christians came to treat as near canonical, claims that when people start conforming their lives to Moses' teachings, and this is really the beginning of the Lutheran movement in Germany, even if they are by nature greedy, they start lending to the needy without charging interest in 2.8. I'm not a scholar on the Bible, but I want to share with you these things. In the Quran, it's in chapters 2, 3, 4, and 30. And those of you who have not seen the Quran would be glad to provide it, and you can read. Not very much different. Number 1, the first revelation, and those who take riba or ribit, and they have been prohibited from doing so. And this actually talks about those who have been circumventing the law of Moses and the law of Jesus, and charging interest and renting money. And then the second revelation says, "O you who believe, do not participate in riba or ribit by charging people multiples of dollars for what the original was, the original principal investment was, and heed Almighty God so you can be successful." And then it describes those who participate in ribit or riba. They do not stand except they stand as people who have been touched by Satan, and they were made imbalanced and not in their full righteous power to think. And then it says that people claim that buying and selling is like actually ribit or riba. But God has allowed people to buy and sell, but not to participate in ribit, which is the renting of money. And then it says, and if you abandon participating in ribit or riba, then you take back your capital and there will be no harm done. And if you give a good loan to the poor and the needy, and he or she cannot afford paying it back, then you have to forgive it. And if you participate in ribit, then you really are conducting a war against God and all of his prophets. And in the canonical law in Islam, to deepen and to strengthen the teachings of Moses and the teachings of Jesus, it was made prohibited to participate in ribit or riba. And actually, it's the worst offense that you can do against God, and that is to take advantage of people who actually do by doing ribit or riba. And in the system, in the economic system that we're talking about, there are 3 important pillars. First of all, that money is actually a measuring device. It's a thing. It cannot be rented out at a price called interest rate. Riba, which is ribit, which is renting money at a price called interest rate. Buying and selling must involve a real property, a tangible property. And the third and most important thing is the word gharar, G-H-A-R-A-R, which consists of 2 parts. The meaning consists of 2 parts. The first one is that you have to be transparent. You have to practice no deception for those who you are dealing with. And the second part, which is very important, you cannot trade in risk. And in today's lingo, you cannot participate in options trading, you cannot participate in derivatives trading, you cannot participate in predicting the future and buying and selling that prediction. I don't know if you know what an option trading is. Actually, Bill would sit across the table from Yahia, and he'd say, Yahia, I think the stock market will go down. I bet it's going to go down. And you know something? I'm going to sell you a piece of paper saying that it is going to go down. So Yahia says, well, no problem. I'll buy it because I think it's going to go up. And for this transaction, this piece of paper is worth $10. So if you do that, then you lose your $10 bill, and Yahia makes the $10. If the market goes down, Yahia pays $10, and you keep your $10. And this is essentially nothing but gambling, and this is the options market, and we can expand on it for those who are interested. So the last item is that prices should be marked to the market. As we said last time, Prophet Moses came in a society which was based on slavery, and then Prophet Jesus came in a society which was based on slavery and agrarian activities, whereby people lost their land and their properties because they needed money and they couldn't pay back. And both Moses and Jesus prohibited taking advantage of people because they could not pay their loans back. And Prophet Muhammad came to deepen and to canonize and to make law out of these two important values, and that was the prohibition of riba or rivet, to produce what we call the Judeo-Christian Islamic value system. Now today, we live in a world which is run by fiat money. Fiat money means a piece of paper which can be green in the United States, can be blue in the euro, it can be red in Nigeria, and it's just a piece of paper that will cost you 2 cents to print. The question is, what is its value? Its value is by government decree, and of course, it reflects the economic activity in that particular country. So the challenge that was faced during Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was that a new business emerged, and the business was trading, buying products from China, silk from China, selling it in Damascus, and then taking the products from Damascus, which were actually already fitted clothing and perfumes, and taking it into Arabia, and going from Arabia and taking the dates and different products and selling them in India. And in each one of these countries, you have a different currency. In the Roman Empire, they were dealing with something called the denarius, which was denominated in gold. In the Byzantine Empire, they were dealing in something called the drachmas, or a currency denominated in silver. The Persian Empire, their currency was denominated in silver. So in China, it was different bartering agreements in India. So the question was, number one, suppose I want to expand my business. How can I get money, which is riba free? Now, I'm not a poor person, as Prophet Moses and Jesus and Muhammad wanted to protect, but I'm really a businessman, and I wanted to participate in growing my business. How can I do that? That's the first challenge. And the second challenge is, if I cross all of these boundaries and create buy and sell agreements, how I can do it in a fair way, fair to me and fair to the seller and the buyer, and also how I can distribute the profits and calculate the profits so I can be fair to my shareholders, who actually were participants in the caravan. So, as I said, there were the dirham, which was denominated by the Byzantine Empire in silver, and the denarius in gold. Today, money is fiat money, which is government decree, and the system that we talk about, which is the commodity indexation, is based on the discipline used by Prophet Muhammad at that time, based on the Quranic revelation. It prices products in terms of reference commodities which have an intrinsic value. And broke down the commodities into two types. The metal pricing commodities, and these are gold and silver at the time. Now, of course, today you can use other metals, rare metals. You can use platinum. You can expand it to use rhodium, and so on and so forth. And you can also use natural resource, which is important to the economy, which was not then. You can include natural gas. You can include crude oil, and so on and so forth. The second category is a category which has to do with food staples. Now, at the time, food staples were mainly wheat, barley, dates, and salt. So they divided the reference commodities into pricing commodities, which are metals or natural resources, and into food commodities, which were barley, wheat, dates, and salt. Today, you can add rice. Today, you can add whatever the staple food is in a certain community. And then they had the discipline. The discipline goes like this. And before I do that, I want to tell you about the activities of buying and selling that were done at that time. If I buy a car today at $10,000, I can sell it to you back to back for $12,000, such that you give me the $12,000 after 2 years. We agree, and you give the money after 2 years. This is called an increase in the future value, and its code word is fadl, F-A-D like David, L. And this is allowed in Islam. Now, what is not allowed is to attach a time value for money, and this is called time-related or nasiya. Give you an example. So I can buy a Toyota for $12,000, and I pay for it cash. That's $12,000. I can buy a Toyota for $18,000 to be paid over 3 years. But then I cannot, after 36 months, come to the person and say, well, you cannot pay me because you did not come and pay in time. I will allow you to keep the car, but the $18,000 will be $20,000. That's not allowed, because then that is taking advantage of a person who has faced a difficulty. Of course, the condition is that the reason for not paying is a justified reason. Somebody lost his job. Somebody had an unexpected force majeure situation, which actually did not allow him to pay. You cannot increase it. That is prohibited. Any questions?
I really to understand the number one, which is the fadl, the allowed. Still having additional 2,000 if within.
Yeah, because what happened is, and this is called murabaha, we'll get to that later on, that you go and buy it spot. You go and buy it spot for $12,000. But then you tell him, I don't have $12,000 today. I'm going to pay you over 3 years. He says, no problem. You can pay me $18,000 over 3 years. That is allowed. This is called fadl, which means increase. But you cannot be charged an extra fee or an extra interest if there is a justified reason for you that you could not pay. You understand, Maria?
What makes it different, doctor? Couldn't we make that as a fadl too?
No, it's not fadl because you made an agreement that this is the price of this product in the future.
Oh, based on the price.
This is an agreement. You sat down and you agreed to a price in the future after 3 years or after 2 years.
I see.
And you cannot change that just because of time, and this is what we call, you cannot actually have a time value for money.
Okay.
But if you do a time value for money, then you look at money as something that grows like a plant, something that grows like a tree, and it's not. Actually, the only way of growing fiat money is by printing this fiat money. Bill?
Sukar has question.
Bill had a question first. Go ahead.
Oh, right. Okay.
Oh, well, it kind of looks to me, if the Toyota is $12,000 today, and then we're predicting that it's going to be worth $18,000 in the future, that kind of looks like an addition of interest to me.
Actually, it is not a prediction that it's actually it's going to be 18,000, but it says that, you know, I can sell it to you and you can give me 18,000, you can give me 10,000, you can give me whatever the price is you agree to in a buy-sell agreement. You understand what I mean? So when you have a buy-sell agreement amongst 100 people, then you will define the market forces of supply and demand for money. You understand? Then it is not really interest that is predefined, but it is a market force of supply and demand that defines it in Riba Fadl. And this is just the beginning. I'm not talking about all the laws yet, but this is also controlled, and I'll tell you how it is controlled. But this is how it was done. Actually, in the old days, because they used the lunar calendar, you know what they used to do? They used to manipulate, the leaders of the different tribes used to manipulate when the end of the month comes, because it's all a function of citation of the moon, of the crescent. So they would say, well, this man owes me $100,000 or equivalent, and it's going to be at the end of this month. Now, how can I make him pay me more because he earned a lot of money? Then he would claim that he sighted the moon tonight and the month has ended, and he goes to him and say, well, pay me. If you don't pay me, I'm going to charge you that much money, and so on and so forth. And that is in the Quran, actually. There is a revelation, إِنَّمَا النَّسِيءُ زِيَادَةٌ فِي الْكُفْرِ. Yeah. Maria Fatah.
Yes, I was going to ask first how this $2,000 would be determined. Like if he buys it today and sells it for $12,000, payable in two.
In today's practice, you just take the interest rate of the day and calculate how much it is over 3 years, and it's $18,000. Frankly, that's what they do. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
But in the old days, they did not have interest rate calculators. They did not have compounding tables. What they said, well, they said, this is a force of supply and demand. I can go to Al-Fattah. He can give it to me for $18,000 after 3 years. I can go to Mike Abdelati. He can give it to me for $17.5. I can go to Bill. He can give me for $16. And you just take your pick. Then you have an open market of forces of supply and demand. And the market, the openness of the market, forces of supply and demand, which is actually the invisible hand of Adam Smith, was actually practiced during that time, and it was an important feature of the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad at that time. Any other questions from Pasadena or Whittier?
Further to this question, Dr. Yahia.
Yes.
If a person makes concurrent agreement, like you will pay me $12,000 within 10 years, within 2 years, and $14,000 within 3 years, and $15,000 within 4 years. You know, something like this.
It can be this way. It has to be a one-shot deal. You cannot correlate it such that it is per time. You say you have to have an agreement for 1 year, or agreement for 2 years, or an agreement for 3 years. You cannot have a time value of money, because then money is looked upon as something that grows, and it only grows if it is invested. This is how the Catholic Church actually later on said, well, you know, this money, if I had taken it back from you, I would have invested it somewhere else, and I would have made 18%. This is my lost value, and this is something that you have caused me to lose, and that's why I'm going to charge you interest. And that was the beginning of thinking in terms of interest.
Sir?
Yes?
If you can't pay the $18,000 back after 3 years, what's to stop you from making a new agreement and calling that
if you cannot pay it for legitimate, if you cannot pay it, then you have to start over again. How? By taking the car and pricing it in the open market. And when you price the car in the open market, then you have a completely different datum from which you operate. This way, you actually break the cycle of inflating money. Keep growing this money bigger and bigger and bigger. As we get in Chapter 5, we talk about banks. You see, the reason we have cycles in the economy is that you keep inflating the bank base using the bank multiplier bigger and bigger and bigger, and then there are one of two things. Either you have to keep printing money and inflating your way out of your problem, or you have to curse that bubble and start over again. And that's what happened in 2008. That's what happened in all of the cyclical changes. And the longer the cycle stays as is, the bigger the drop and the bigger the explosion. So if you cannot pay after 3 years, or if you pay after 3 years, then you start a completely new system whereby you have a car which is available in the market. Now you have to price it in the market, get its real market price. That market price can be $10,000, it can be $15,000, or it can be $5,000, and then you can start the whole buy and sell agreement again.
Okay, but sir, how do you
am I clear?
Drop, and that would mean that the person who lent the money in the first place would, they wouldn't be getting $12,000 anymore. They might only be getting $8,000.
Well, but that's the point. The point is you owe me that $18,000. We have a buy-sell agreement, and you pay me the $18,000. That's it.
Not a loan. It's a trade.
It's not a loan. It's a trade. It's a debt. You see the difference between loan and a debt. The problem is we confuse it because we call it a credit, but there is a difference between I borrow money from you, and you and I have a buy-sell agreement. When you have a buy-sell agreement, then you created debt, which is something you owed me based on something I delivered you, which had a value to you and to me.
But that would mean that
It's clearer as we get in the future, I promise you. Go ahead.
So they would always have to pay you $18,000?
After a certain period of time, yes. Now, you have the prerogative of saying, well, I've seen that your economic situation is bad. I'm going to reduce it to 10 or 15 or 12, and that is your own decision as the holder of that debt. Promise. Okay, so this is just the beginning. So there are two types of transactions. You cannot get money to be time related. Next. So the rule is, if you are doing gold, you cannot increase the value of gold at any rate. In other words, if I give you an ounce of gold, you have to give me an ounce of gold back the same weight, and it has to be spot transaction. For instance, I go to a gold dealer and I give him an ounce of gold in the form of a little ingot, little cube called an ounce of gold. I give it to him, and he gives me back a ring made of gold. The transaction has to be ounce for ounce, and it has to be on the spot. He cannot say, I'm going to give it to you after 5 days or after 6 days, which means that you cannot have any futures market in these basic indexed commodities. Why? Because if you have current merchandise, I will buy it from you, and I will pay you with current merchandise. That applies to gold, applies to silver, applies to wheat, applies to barley, applies to dates, applies to salt, or any other commodity that your economy is based on and you decide is a staple, basic economy. All right? Is that clear?
Yes.
And actually, if I can add something here, it makes it a limitation on trading in these things. It
Of
makes
course.
you want to change back.
Of course, of course.
That's why it says if you
In other
want
words,
to do it,
in other words,
benefit.
you cannot come from India, which has a lot of gold, and come to America and say, you know something, I'm going to buy 2 bars of gold from you, and you know I'm going to pay you when I get it from India. Now, it's done today. They will say, okay, let's have an agreement, and you can pay me then 2.5 bars of gold when it comes from India. And actually, you may not have that in India. But now you own 2 bars of gold, and you can use it to go and buy from India. This way, you create actually a speculative market in a basic commodity. It's exactly like having a measuring device, a ruler, and that ruler, you keep stretching it out or pressing it in. Am I clear? I'll tell you what. Let me tell you what Goldman Sachs does. What Goldman Sachs does in today's market, which is not allowed by this rule I just mentioned, he goes to the Nigerian government and says, Nigerian government, you have so many tons of gold sitting in storage in Switzerland. You don't do anything with it. Can I borrow it from you? And I'll pay you 0.5%. Now, if Goldman Sachs borrows it from Nigeria, on the books, he owns gold, right? And when he owns gold at a certain price, what does he do? He can sell it. When he sells it, the supply of gold goes up. What happens to the price of gold?
Down. So
It goes down. So what he does, he buys that gold at a lower price, and then he returns it back to Nigeria, and he makes the spread in dollars. And that's not allowed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one way that I think of it that is very helpful is that to avoid speculation, it is not it's not favored to trade in these basic commodities. So the rule said if you're going to trade, you have to trade the same way at the same time. This encourages, it doesn't make sense to trade gold for gold at the same time. Thereby you can't do it. So the idea is to trade gold for different things to improve the economy rather than trade in these basic commodities themselves. Try to make money in these basic commodities. So that's how I look at this limitation.
This actually, this is about gold and silver, but let's talk about wheat, for instance. If you have a bag of wheat today in Richardson, Texas, when I exchange it for a bag of wheat, it has to be the same bag of wheat, the same weight of wheat in Los Angeles, California. I cannot say that, you know, I'm going to get the bag and I'm going to pay it back later on. It has to be a spot transaction. It has to be done on the spot. This way, you cannot speculate in these markets. You cannot look at any variations because this is your reference point. This is your, you know how you decide my weight is 150 pounds. What is this word pound? Pound is a reference point that nobody can change it because the scale is kept in a place that nobody can change it. And these are the scales that you cannot change: the gold, the silver, the wheat, the barley, the dates, and the salt, and actually can be other things. Rice can be crude oil, and so on and so forth.
But it can be in different locations, right, Doctor? I can't take a pound
it
here
has to be,
and pay a
the
pound
position
somewhere.
has to be in the spot, on the spot.
Face to face.
In other words, yes, it got to be
Not
done
a different
hand to
location.
hand. It's called actually hand to hand.
But can somebody in Los
give me
Angeles
this?
take the wheat that I give you here in Texas?
Yes.
Okay.
You can? Sure. Hand to hand, immediately. With the communications and everything else, it has to be done this way.
Okay.
You cannot
Different
create,
locations.
you cannot create a time.
Will be $4, $5.
No, because it has to be.
Now this is very interesting because this very discipline or rule was presented by James Baker III. As you remember, James Baker used to be the Department of Treasury Secretary in the time of President Reagan. Actually, was President Reagan Chief of Staff, and he was the Department of Treasury Secretary. And he actually told world leaders in 1987 that the Reagan administration, with all of this inflation that was going on, is prepared to using gold and other currencies as a reference. And he said, explained that gold could be used in a specially designed index along with other commodities to help governments discern inflation and then adjust their policies by raising interest rates or taxes, for example. Why is that? Because if I say, I think the weather conditions are going to be very bad and there will be a lot of rain, then the production of wheat is going to go down. Then I'm going to go out and buy all the wheat in the market to hoard it, right? So the rule says you cannot do that. If you buy wheat, you have to pay it in wheat. If you buy gold, you have to pay it in gold. And then the rest of the rules are coming, so please bear up with me.
Sir,
all right?
I had a question.
Bear up with me. I'm coming to the rest of the rules. I know I'm giving it piecemeal. Now, here is the second part of the rule. If you trade gold, it has to be for gold. But you can trade gold for silver. So if the commodity is of the same kind, in other words, if it's a metal, but different in substance, in other words, gold and silver, then you can have an increase. You can say, I can exchange 5 ounces of silver for 1 ounce of gold. That's allowed. But again, it has to be on the spot. All right? So this way, you can take gold and exchange it for silver. By the same token, if it is food, you can exchange wheat for wheat at the same amount, but you can exchange wheat for barley or wheat for date at whatever the market commands. All right? That's the second rule. By this I mean, if I want to price wheat, all right, I can go. I am a wheat producing country, America, and I can go to Thailand, which is a rice producing country, and I say I'm going to price wheat in terms of rice, and we agree on an exchange, and that's fine. That's acceptable. 5 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, depends on the market forces of supply and demand, right? But wheat for wheat has to be 1 to 1. Rice for rice has to be 1 to 1. Dates for dates has to be 1 to 1. And the exchange has to be on the spot. Nothing called futures. Nothing called trading in risk, which is gharar. Now, this is very interesting because then comes a story that happened during the time which is the foundation of our theory, which we call marking to market. Someone went to the Prophet Muhammad with dates, and it was very high quality dates, large dates, very high quality. And then Prophet Muhammad told him, where did you get this from? This is very expensive, you cannot afford it. So he told him, I took 20 small, low quality dates, and I went to the market and I exchanged them for these 3 large, high quality dates. Prophet Muhammad told him that is not allowed because this is considered ribit or riba. Well, yeah, how so? He said, you should have, because the rule says if you exchange 1 date, it's 1 date for 1 date, regardless if it is a smaller date or a larger date, date for date. So he said, you should have taken the small dates, exchange them for another reference commodity, which can be gold or silver or wheat, take the proceeds and buy the larger size dates. Because the biggest concern of the system is always make sure that the market forces of supply and demand are not compromised. So you price things as, in fact, the market forces, supply and demand would define it.
Can we just ask a quick question? If
Sure
you're
you can.
exchanging wheat with wheat, let's say,
I can,
now why is it
I
that you
cannot
can
see
sell
what
wheat?
happened. Because Muhammad? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Muhammad.
Yeah.
So for exchanging wheat with barley, can you sell wheat in the market, much like the dates, to buy barley?
Say again? Say again, Wallah.
You have to sell the wheat to buy barley.
Well, you can, if you have wheat and you have barley, you can exchange wheat for barley at the rate of 2 to 1, 3 to 1, whatever the market commands.
Okay. Okay.
You understand, Muhammad?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Now, if they are different, then you can create a future market. In other words, you can say, we can exchange rice for rice, or wheat for wheat, all right? So they are different, so it can be 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 as established by the free market forces of supply and demand. Now, but you cannot define it by date. In other words, the delivery has to be done on the spot. Now, the next point is, what about if actually you want to exchange, let us say, a pair of trousers which are made out of cotton, and cotton is a staple. Now, it's trousers. You can buy it, sell it anytime you want, at any rate you want, as long as you use the reference currency, which is gold and silver or wheat. So you can buy a home, for instance, using gold. You can buy a home using silver. You can buy a home using rice. You can buy a home using oil. You can buy a home using barley. And then that will be your reference point, and I'll get to the next slide. I'll give you an example of a personal experience. In 1974, we lived in Plano, Texas, and we bought our first house in America for $46,000. We put a down payment of $3,500. In 1977, we sold it for $65,000. Now, of course, we were very happy because we made $19,000 on an investment of $3,500. And that was a humongous rate of return. It's a rate of return. First of all, we increased the value of the house by 41% in 2 years. And the return on the original investment was $19,000 divided by $3,500. That is 543% rate of return. Humongous return. Now, let us assume that I applied the rule that we just mentioned, and I said, no, I'm not going to do this in dollars. I'm going to do it in wheat. So I'm going to go and buy my home in wheat. So that means we bought the home in terms of 9,957 bushels of wheat, which was the price of wheat at that time, $4.62. We sold it in 1977 for 29,630 bushels of wheat. Why? Because the price of wheat in US dollars was $2.16. So what was the return? We realized the return of 300% on the value of the house in wheat. All right? Now compare that to the return in US dollar, which was 41%. But the return in wheat was 300%. And then the return on invested capital, which is worth 3,500 or 757 bushels of wheat, the return was, look at that number, 11,620%. So if we bought the house in terms of wheat, which was a stable product in my economy, suppose I'm a wheat producing country, my return would have been 11,620. Let's talk about gold. Suppose I bought this house in terms of gold. the value of the house in terms of gold was 421 ounces of gold. We sold in 1977 428 ounces of gold, and the price of gold at that time was $149 per ounce. That means the home price in terms of gold appreciated 1.8%. Let me go back to these numbers because this is amazing. And it shows, and I'll tell you why all of this is happening, and this is what we actually call the discipline in our calculations. In US dollars, we said that we made 543, the house increased 41% in dollars, and we made 543% on an initial investment of $3,500. In wheat, what we do, we actually had 300% return on investment in wheat in the house, and actually we made 11,620% return on investment in wheat on that house if we were doing it in wheat, if we were in a wheat society. For gold, that was exactly the opposite. In gold, the rate of return was 1.8%. So the question is, what do we do? Should we deal in wheat? Should we deal in gold? Should we deal in rice? Or what should we do? And the challenge is to come up with a system by which we look at the forces of supply and demand to decide when a bubble, an economic bubble, is actually created. And we talked about palms, for instance, or grapes. You can buy grapes off the trees that has juice in it, or you can buy grapes in the form of raisins after you dry it. And if you apply the rule, they have to be grape for grape because it's food. It's a food item. In order to find out how much the value of that grape is, you have to set it in the market for a reference commodity, that's gold or silver or barley or wheat or rice, and take the product and buy the raisin with it, then you know the value of the raisin on the market. So that is something that I want to remind you of. Now, I think we talked about the marking to the market enough. Do we have any question on marking to market?
Dr. do you want to elaborate on the meaning of the difference in why in gold there was such a low return compared to wheat?
No, we'll come to that because I know that they're all puzzled
about that, yeah.
You are all puzzled with the returns, right? Hello?
Yes, doctor.
Are you all puzzled?
Yes.
The reason for that is that we are used to look at everything in terms of the glasses of the dollar, right? So gold is dollar, wheat is dollar, rice is dollar. But we never look at rice in terms of wheat or wheat in terms of gold and so on, which are real tangible things. The reason we are used to dollars is because we got used to it. But the fact of the matter is dollar is just a piece of paper. It's a printed material. Has no intrinsic value. It doesn't grow on trees. It is not found by mining it. It doesn't take any human effort to produce it. All it does is you just go to a printing press and print it with some human intelligence and modeling to calculate how much you print. You understand what I'm saying? So, in order to reflect the real local economies, you have to go and ask, what is your economy based on? Is it the printed piece of paper or the actual product that you produce? And we'll go deeper and talk about that a little bit later. The price of gold, as we agreed before 1971, was $35 an ounce. The price of gold today, in 2000, this was made in 2010, but it's not much different, $1,700 an ounce of gold. Oil price in 1971 was $2.20. Today, it's about $100. Look at the multiplier in each case. 48 times. It is the same gold in 1971 and 2010 and 11 and 12. And it's the same oil, 71. What is the difference? It is the dollar, because it is 48 times. That means we have 48 times, probably 48 times the supply of dollar. Am I clear? Let me show you something else. This is the price of rice in US dollars. And you can see the price of rice going up and down. Look at the fluctuations in the price of rice. You see these fluctuations?
Yes.
Now, let's look at this slide. This is the price of rice in gold, not in dollars, in gold. Look at what happened to the real price of rice. What happened to the real price of rice in terms of gold? Go up or go down?
Down.
It precipitously went down and then started fluctuating at a much lower level. That means the rice farmer has been compromised. The poor rice farmer is not making as much money on his rice anymore as he used to in terms of gold. You understand? And that's why most of the farmers in the farmland are not farmers anymore. They don't want to be farmers because they're not making as much money. They want to be joining the people who are doing the dollars in the cities. So an honorable farmer in a small village in Ethiopia or in Egypt or in India or in Malaysia doesn't want to be a farmer, doesn't want his kids to be farmers, because it is not paying him anymore to be a farmer, because the value of the product has been precipitously going down. Look at the relationship between rice and wheat, and you look at how much it is essentially leveling off if you do rice and wheat. This is the price of a bushel of wheat in terms of gold. Look at the price of wheat. Used to be very high in gold, but then precipitously went down. All happened as a result of the break of the relationship between the dollar and the gold. Now we can print as many dollars as we want, and by the time people get to know the value of the US dollar, especially in the developing countries, it's too late because the price is down big time. So now we have a discipline. We'll talk about it a little bit later in chapter 5. Now we have a discipline to find out if there is a bubble in the market or not, based on some basic reference material. In this case, we use gold, we use silver, we use crude oil, we use whatever basic material there is in the economy to find out what the macroeconomic picture is in the economy, to find out if the value of a home in Northern California is really $1 million or it's too much. And the second, which is the micro part, we base it on what we call marking to the market to make sure that when we buy a home, we buy that home making economic sense. And that is the main brand of what we do at Riba Free Financing and Riba Free Investing. Whenever we finance something, we want to make sure that the investment that we do makes economic and prudent sense. I'm going to stop here, and if you have any questions, please let me know. The different models that are used, and we'll talk about that later on, is the Murabaha, which is cost plus. What is cost plus? I buy a car for $12,000, and I can pay cash for it, or I can buy it and sell it back to back for $18,000 over 3 years, and that is called cost plus. Now, the rule is, as we said, if the man cannot pay in 3 years, then he only can pay in 4 years. How much should he pay? Bill? How much does he pay? Bill?
Same amount that was agreed upon in the original.
Same amount. Doesn't make any difference. If he pays after 1 year, how much he pays?
Same amount.
Same amount. Now, if they sit down and agree it would be lower, that is their prerogative, but it's the same amount. The second model is what we call the joint venture model, where I go with direct investment with my customer, and we actually become partners, and we participate in the profit or loss. And the third model is what we call money management. So I can give my money to Mike Abdul Rahman. I say, Mike, I've got $1 million. Please go ahead and manage it. He say, okay, I'll manage it, and I'll get a management fee, and then we get the profit. And then the third model is the model which has to do with growing orchards. I don't have money to buy seeds. I don't have money to buy fertilizer. I don't have money to grow orchards. So I will go and say, well, can you please invest in my orchard? And that is what we call SALAM, S-A-L-A-M, which is a futures financing of the futures production of this orchard. And then the last one is the financing of future production. I want to produce cars. I don't have the money to produce cars, so I'm going to give you the capital and the money such that the cars that you're going to produce, I'm going to buy. The condition in the last two models actually are very, very strict, such that you do not use it as a means to hold that product, because the temptation is good. You can be the only producer of automobiles in a country, and I'll go and finance you, and you lock in the cars into my possession, so nobody can buy cars except from me. Then I can control the price, and there are some requirements to control that. Any questions before I say goodbye to you?
But Doctor, so quick question.
Yes.
And I'm getting this from the book on page 54 and to 57. The murabaha as versus the leasing or ijara.
Yes.
In the book, you say that any financing or the financial institutions are not allowed by law to own the assets and then lease it back to the customer.
That is,
but on the other side, on the leasing side, we're saying that the process that the financial institution will own it and then lease it back. Can you just clarify on that? Because
the model, here's the thing. In the leasing, there are two types of leases in America. There is a financial lease. Financial lease, really, what they are doing, they are leasing you money. And there is an actual lease. Like you go to a Honda dealer, and the Honda dealer says, well, this car is owned by me. So Mike, for instance, leases his cars all the time. He goes and leases an Infiniti. So the title of the car is not in Mike's name. The title of the car is the name of the entity that leases it to him. So that is what we call the right to the neck, or milk al-raqaba, as we mentioned in the book. But then Mike is leasing the use of that car. Now, how can they figure out how much is the lease rate? They figure it out based on two things. Based on the interest rate they charge on the money. How? They say, suppose the Infiniti value, if I buy it cash, is $50,000 today. Mike is going to use it for 3 years. Then he makes an assumption of what the car value is after 3 years. And that assumption is based on a depreciation rate. Assume that the depreciation rate is, let us say, get Mike here in the picture. Depreciation rate, say, 10% or 5%, whatever the number is. Then he knows the value after 3 years. He knows the value in the beginning, and based on that, he calculates how much is the financing of the difference of these two values, and he comes up with the lease rate. The second factor is, of course, the market forces of supply and demand. Now, in America, no bank is allowed to own title to a home, to a building, or to anything. Banks are in the business of financing only, so we cannot own it. The only time we can own something is by default. Like somebody bought a Mercedes, he cannot make a payment, so we foreclose on it, it becomes ours, and it becomes OREO, or other real estate owned. And the regulation requires you to sell it as soon as possible. The same thing applies on homes. The same thing applies on buildings, and so on and so forth. Does this answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions, Rashida?
For Doctor.
Fajia.
We have one question, Doctor. We just had here. Simple question is, you lend me $10 and you said, Rashia, you're going to give me back $15. Those $5, some people think that that is interest. How should we?
Actually, that's a very good question, and it's very simple, but it's very good. Because if I give you $10, they are $10, but based on the rule, what should I do? I should refer it to a reference price. Correct, Rashida? So I would ask, how many ounces of gold can the $10 buy today? You understand, Rashida? Let's assume it will buy me, an ounce of gold, right? So what you owe me is an ounce of gold, right? So the question is, after you pay me, I need to get you to pay me an ounce of gold. No increase. That ounce of gold can be $20. That ounce of gold can be $5. You understand? And that actually, we think of the dollar as the reference point because it is your reference. We all have been conditioned to think of the dollar as the reference. But really, if you think of a reference commodity as a reference, then you will find that prices are stabilized, and you'll find that people are treated a little bit more fairly than they are today.
Okay, so around the table we're saying, here's the thing. So
I'm enjoying it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So today I come to you and say, doctor, what I need, I'm short $5 for lunch. Can you lend me the $5? And then, so now in
mind, you're not lending the $5. I can buy the lunch on your behalf.
And you will buy
I can buy the lunch on your behalf. And if you are a needy person, I'll give it to you as a good loan, and knowing that you may not be able to pay it back to me. That's one approach. If you are a person who forgot his money at home, right?
Yeah,
and that you'll go and get it after a week, then I will say, no problem. I will buy the lunch for you, and Bill, I'm going to sell it to you for, I buy it for $2, I sell it for $3, right? And that's legitimate. That's okay. Because Bill will tell me, oh, doctor, thank you very much. He'll go to Muhammad. Muhammad will say, no problem, Bill. You can give me $2 after 2 days. And that brings in the forces of supply and demand, market forces of supply and demand. He can go to a Yahia will tell him, I want $2.50. He go to Yahya, he says, I want $3. He goes to Ghada, she wants $2.25. He goes to Muhammad, he wants $2. Who is he going to settle to? With Muhammad, right, Bill?
Yeah.
So that is the whole idea of the market forces, supply and demand. Then actually it is defined not by decree of the Federal Reserve, but by actual market forces, supply and demand. What I suggest that you do this week is to disengage your thinking of the dollar. Engage in thinking of a tangible commodity. Why would you actually do this? Because then you will actually look at value and not look at numbers. So far, we are used to looking at numbers. I am a millionaire. Well, actually, the fact of the matter is, the millionaire of today is nothing compared to the millionaire of the past. Do you know why? Because you have a piece of paper and pencil, write these numbers down. An ounce of gold used to be $35. These are dollars, put down dollar, 1971. An ounce of gold today is $1,700, and under the dollar put $2,012. Now what's the ratio of the $1971 and the $2,012? What's the ratio? Divide 35 by 1,700. How much is that?
47.
That means 2 cents. The dollar today, the dollar of 2012, is worth 2 cents of the cents of 1971. Can you believe that? Are you stunned? Daniel, are you with me?
I'm with you.
You understand? You understand, Ghada?
Yes.
Yeah.
The problem you and I have is that they look the same. It's a green piece of paper. It looks the same, and it's called the same dollar. But fact of the matter is, it's a different dollar. If you refer it to something that has an intrinsic value, is that correct, Alex?
Yes.
Matthew, who's sitting at the other table? Is that Matthew?
Yes.
Hello, Matthew. Good morning.
Morning, doctor.
Good. All right. Rashida, do you understand?
Yes, doctor.
So what I'm saying is, suppose you took $100,000 then, and you stashed them into your mattress because you don't trust anybody. How much is the value of the $100,000 that you stashed from 71 until today? How much is that?
50,000.
How much, Alex?
2,000. 2,000.
$2,000. And do this exercise. Do this exercise. If you borrowed $100,000 from Rashida in 1971, and you say, I'm going to do it according to the discipline. How? By converting the $100,000 into gold. Divide 100 by 35, 100,000 by 35. How many ounces of gold? 2,857 ounces of gold. All right? So I will say, Rashida, in 2012, February 10th, give me gold. I want 2,857 ounces of gold. So Rashida goes and buys 2,857 ounces of gold. How much are you going to pay for, Rashida? Multiply by 1,700.
Wow, that's a lot.
That means you pay me $4.85 million, Rashida. Do I make my point?
Yes.
Anwar?
Yeah, but I have a question. Yeah, instead of using gold, if we use, for instance, wheat or rice, then we're going to have a totally different result.
You're right. You're 100% right. That's why I'm looking. What we're working on right now is a matrix of. So when a country says that this is my currency, then we tell the country, no problem, but it has to reflect a matrix of your economic factors. And these economic factors can be gold, can be crude oil, can be rice, can be sugar cane, and so on and so forth. Then you have a matrix of these commodities that form the economy. Then when we deal with each other as countries, we deal with an incentive. You know that incentive is how much more production you can make and how much more economic activity you can make. And this way we can grow and be fair to everyone and encourage people to be richer and more productive.
We were just thinking about inflation has a whole new meaning now.
Okay? But actually it is not inflation. It is actually the printing of money.
That's what I'm,
The printing of money. And the question is, how can we, in our small way, and we are very small, well, people say, oh, this is unfair, we have to change the monetary system and so on and so forth. Well, actually, I'm not that. I'm very small. But I'm telling you, we need to discipline ourselves in our decisions to look at this and make sure that when we buy something, when we do something, it is done right.